The problem is that for a while the crisis hasn't hit Africa, and there is some delay between the crisis in the advanced economy and even the emerging economy and the crisis hitting low-income countries, mainly in Africa. Maybe you remember a few months ago people were arguing that there would be some decoupling and that there may be a slowdown in the growth in the advanced economies without consequences in Africa. We always have argued it was unfortunately wrong, and that after some delay the crisis will hit Africa. Now it's the case because trade is more difficult, export from Africa are more difficult because of lack of capital inflows, most developed economies repatriating their capital, and so developing economy lacking of resources. So altogether now Africa is hard hit by the crisis, and we are forecasting a rate of growth for sub-Saharan Africa which is for 2009 around 3%, 2% less than the last forecast we had.
Do you see sub-Saharan Africa going into recession at all?
No, we may have a recession at the global level, but still some growth in sub-Saharan Africa. You know, but even 3% as an average for sub-Saharan Africa means some country over 3, but some below 3, and at the per capita level means for most African countries 0 growth per capita, which is very difficult at the level of income, which is the average level of income in Africa.
Looking at kind of the IMF's balance sheet and donor pledges that have been made, a lot of these are from the world's wealthiest countries. Is there going to be some kind of preference for these wealthy countries as opposed to developing nations, or is there going to be the same kind of cover considering the 1998 developing nations crisis?
No, there's no differences. I mean, we have members and all members have the same right. What is true is that the financial needs of developed countries are much bigger than those of low-income countries. But in some respect, I'm very much shocked that we're able to find billions of dollars for emerging countries or some developed countries, and we'll hardly find some million of dollars for low-income countries, many of which being African. So they're the same rules, but obviously it's more difficult to find donors for low-income countries, and I'm committed these days to double the resources we have for lending to African countries.
You have said that Africa is vulnerable. Is the IMF concerned about the lack of representation of African countries on the global forum at this stage?
Certainly, as you may know, in 2008 we made a first step forward, increasing the representation of African countries. And what is interesting is that this move certainly was not big enough, but the reform was a dynamic reform, which means that it was the first round of a system which is going to go on by a period of 5 years, and in 5 years from now, 4 years from now, a new round of computation will take place, and the share of Africa will increase again. And maybe it would be a good idea to shrink a little this period of 5 years and have this new computation in only 3 years, 2011 for instance, so that finally the size, the representation, the voice of Africa, and I won't talk about the other institution, in my institution, and the IMF, will increase again.
A lot of countries have already turned to the IMF, and some will be doing so in the near future. What type of loan facilities will the IMF be offering African countries, and what type of conditions will these have?
Well, we are changing today's our different toolkit for lending to African countries. We are making it more flexible and streamlining the conditionality. Conditionality in some ways is necessary because the goal of the IMF is to provide funding, but at the same time to provide advice. And you provide only the money without giving the correct advice, then you just lose the money. So we have to do both. But those policy advice can be focused, have to be focused on the crisis of today, not concern a lot of questions will have nothing to do with the problem you want to fix. And so that's why I say we're streamlining conditionality. At the same time, we're trying to implement a social conditionality, which means that among the condition and the advice of economic policy that we give to the country we're lending to, there are some advice concerning the way to help the most vulnerable part of the population, because in crisis like this one, it's always the most vulnerable which are the more hit. And so we look with the countries what kind of measure can be implemented to take care of those most vulnerable part of the population.
And just finally, I mean, how important is governance in this process? Recently you commended President Kikwete on his handling of the EPA scandal, but not all countries have this level of governance.
That's right. Governance, especially in Africa, is a very important problem. Fighting against corruption is very important, and everywhere where something is done correctly, we have to commend the government. Was the case of, you were right in quoting it, President Kikwete in this question of the central bank. There may be other cases like this in other part of Africa, but it's obvious that governance, which may appear something which is very far from economic policy, it in fact at the roots of a correct implementation of the good policies.